Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our IMBIS Ask Me Anything series. IMBIS is the International Mind-Brain Education Society. And the aim of this series is to build connections among IMBIS trainees and non-trainees, so people who are newer to the field, people who are more established in the field, practitioners and researchers, and support the translation of research into policy and practice. So I'll start with a quick introduction. My name is Chris Simmers. I'm a PhD student at the University of Connecticut studying the learning sciences. I'm co-president with Sylvia. Sylvia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Sylvia, and I study protective mechanisms within the area of math anxiety. And yeah, I'm in the UK at the moment. And yeah, but originally from the US, so collaborations across.
And this was all organized with my colleague, Sarah Gilmore, who is our policy and practice chair for the IMBIS Trainee Board as well. So these sessions are recorded and they'll be shared on YouTube later. So you can watch out for that announcement. We'll share it on Twitter, on the IMBIS website. And if you're registered, you'll also receive an email with a link to the recording and any resources mentioned today. We have 2 ASL interpreters here today, and live transcription is enabled. If it's not enabled right now, we'll make sure that happens shortly. So please take advantage of those services if they're helpful to you by pinning the interpreters on your screen and turning on captions. We're going to do our best to help out with that as well as facilitators. We'll start with 15 minutes of a presentation from our speaker today, Glenn Whitman. And then we'll have a 15-minute facilitated discussion. And the last final 15 minutes will be the Ask Me Anything from attendees here today. So we encourage you to please, as you think of questions, please put them in the chat. And we have a really diverse range of attendees today. So we also invite you to respond to other people's questions. We have some people who are newer to the field and might ask, what is MBE? What does that mean? So if you see that question and you want to answer, please jump in and help each other out. And I think that's it. And just a little bit of vocabulary clarification. I know that we will sometimes use some acronyms that we might be really familiar with, but if we forget to explain them, ask in the chat so we can clarify. MBE is when you're going to hear a lot, and I know Glenn's going to unpack that one a little bit for all of us today. So to introduce our invited speaker, Glenn Whitman. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning at St. Andrew's Episcopal School, where he also teaches history and coaches soccer, I believe. He is the co-author of NeuroTeach, Brain Science and the Future of Education, and co-designer of NeuroTeach Global and NeuroTeach Global Student, used by educators and students around the world. Glenn and the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning received the Exemplifying the Mission of IMBIS Award back in 2016, and they have continued to do great work from then. So he's going to catch us up a little bit on what they've done between getting that IMBIS Award and what they do today. He works with teachers and leaders in public and private schools in the US and abroad. And I think the work was primarily in the K-12 space, but now is also reaching higher ed. So lots to share. All right, Glenn, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Great to see this international group of educators, researchers, consultants, some independent schools, some public and private and charter. Great. I love thinking about this researcher-teacher connection. And I hope we leave here together both friends and allies, and also with new ways to maybe grow this work together. As Chris said, I am a history teacher. I've been an advisor, certainly, but I have a lot of different jobs at the school I'm at. But I'm also the executive director of a very unique research center that's based in a school that works with students from preschool through 12th grade, 2-year-olds through 18-year-olds, on translating the science of how the brain learns to the everyday practice of educators. And then my biggest message is, for those who are in the university level or the researchers, I need you. We need you to do this work. And I'm going to show you why you also need us. And maybe we can find more ways to be connected. In 2007 is when our school and you're invited to our campus anytime you're in the Washington, D.C. area, we asked ourselves this generative question. And I generally don't read from slides from what I know about extraneous cognitive load. So if you can look up for a second or look on, I'll pause and wonder how you would actually answer this question. And again, we came up with like 20 different answers. You can, how do you do better project-based learning? How do you get better feedback? What truly is metacognition? What are the better memory strategies out there? Because kids are using flashcards, but maybe not well. How do we take care of and set the conditions for high order cognition and deeper learning? But we sort of got lucky in a survey of our faculty. We had this throwaway question of, have any of you ever studied the brain, been an undergraduate or graduate student in maybe a field related to the brain or brain science, read a book, been to a conference like IMBIS's conference? And we got roughly about a 20% response to yes. So we had this idea, like, isn't that ironic? The organ of learning is the brain. I would also say the heart and the whole body as well. It comes to school with every kid every day. Shouldn't every educator in every classroom, regardless of geographic location, know more about the science of how the brain learns, works, changes, and thrives? So we tried to start to figure this thing out, like, how would we train 100% of our teachers in this work? So one of the first sort of discouraging articles we read, to be honest, was John Brewer's sort of seminal piece that a lot of us refer to, of saying it's a bridge too far. Connecting academic research, educational neuroscience, and classroom practices is just a bridge too far. And I would like to say today, I think that gap has been closed, or maybe connected. Though I would have to ask John what he thinks as well. So what were our first readings? Well, we turned to the research and researchers. So we're not too far from Johns Hopkins University and Dr. Mariel Hardiman. We sought out and some of her early work around the brain-targeted teaching model that she had created. And certainly Dan Willingham's work out of University of Virginia, which a lot of us have read, was really foundation to our thinking, like, hey, cognitive science, neuroscience, educational neuroscience, these fields might have something to offer the everyday teacher if we can figure out how to translate it in teacher-friendly, next-day applicable, usable ways. We got connected with Harvard's Graduate School of Education and Dr. Kurt Fisher, the late Dr. Kurt Fisher and his team. People like Todd Rose were there, Mary Helen Emer Daniel Yang was there. I think Tracy Tokuhama Espinoza was up there around that time or since then. And they told us about this field called mind, brain, and education, right? Which is part of the IMBIS sort of letters, I guess. This intersection of cognitive science, behavioral psychology, neuroscience, and education research. And the idea is, how do you get that into the sort of the teaching and learning complexity blender to impact real classrooms and real schools and real students? And the CTTL, the organization I lead with teachers, is sort of sits in that gap between many of you, the researchers, and the everyday teachers who we want to support more to hopefully help the educational, the learning outcomes, the social, emotional, and identity development outcomes of kids. The field is vast. I would argue there's something for everybody, and most schools are talking, whether they're using the research directly or not, in many of these spaces. So I'll pause for a second and just, I know a lot of you are researching in some of these areas or consulting maybe schools in some of these areas, but this is the breadth of the field we think is MBE. And the goal is sort of not for every school to do everything here, but to decide in their context, in their cultures with their kids, what is needed next to support the whole child social, emotional, and academic development. Now, if you're in the DC region, pop by our center, love to have you. I usually sit in that sort of glass space with the beautiful rings on the outside, but we see ourselves as a connector between organizations like IMBIS and the great researchers and educators involved in it, and the everyday practices of teachers at scale throughout the country and throughout the world. And our hypothesis when our school started doing this work were if teachers and school leaders and policymakers knew more about the student brain, could this elevate research-informed, student-centered teaching practices and instructional design? Could we improve student outcomes, accelerate school innovation, and that's a very hard word to define, and be a pathway actually for attracting, developing, and retaining the next generation of teachers and school leaders who want to be involved in schools that are using research to inform and transform practices. So how do we measure our work and do our work? Well, we've created a diagnostic with some educators and researchers formerly at the Science of Learning Institute at Johns Hopkins University who helped us think about these questions. You can access this free diagnostic as an individual. Be curious to see how this audience does, and your feedback on the diagnostic is always welcome. You also can ask for a specific URL for an individual school where everybody gets an individual report for free, and we can aggregate the data out for the school in different ways. Because we know of over the 8,000 teachers who have completed our survey, roughly 20% and a self-reported survey, so we know that has flaws in it, have foundational and accurate understanding of the science of how the brain learns. Again, there seems to be an opportunity to connect some of the research you guys are doing in the audience with the everyday practice of teachers. What we are seeing in our data, right, on the vertical axis where we measure self-reported knowledge of MBE, the science of how the brain learns, works, changes, and thrives, and confidence in bringing it to the classroom, that number when we first start out is usually a lot higher than the actual answers, what the research suggests are the right answers. And what we are noticing is that we need multiple touch points. We know that's good professional learning and development to move teachers up into that upper right quadrant, which is our goal, where your self-reported answers align with the right answers, right? So there is enough, I would argue, right? And no offense to anybody who's doing cutting edge research or new topic research, there's enough what we call ready-made research already in the field to really look at to try to connect to teachers. There is a need for more replication though, because we know research is and its ability to impact teachers and students is context and kid dependent. So, you know, we are very much interested in replication studies. And I know some are being done right now around mindset work and metacognition work. But again, we love original research, but there's a lot really out there for us to use. And, you know, these are some of the papers that we are looking at most recently. And, you know, Chris, thanks for all the ones you feed to me all the time in your current work at UConn. But these ones are really piqued the interest of some of the teachers we work with of late. So send me your research and we can share it out as well. And these are some of the researchers in the field, some are involved and belong to IMBIS, that have really been important partners and allies in our work. You know, I often say I have an academic crush on Mary Helen Imordino Yang. I've told her this, she's at USC, and I told my wife this as well. Just because her work in social and emotional learning has been sort of transformative for us teachers. You know, love to put more and more people in this space. And there are great organizations that are really, we turn to a lot. IMBIS is obviously one of them, but the Learning Scientists, the Global Science of Learning Education Network, and I think Pooja has put together a great organization of women in the field. In the UK, evidence-based education. There's a lot of great groups that need the research you're doing to help translate it, but still, we overestimate the ability of teachers to know what to do with that research in their classrooms. So we've turned to other books as well in the field, and I will give everybody these slides in connection to these resources, but we've also created our own resources and research base. So if you go to our website, the CTTL.org, you'll see our tiered research base that translate the work you are doing, right? Because we're trying to move the ready-made research into everyday schools and the work of students. We also know that multiple modality, multiple sensory translation is really important for teachers to change their current practices or to validate their current practices. So we've created different tools, printed in-person experiences, fully asynchronous, to get teachers to begin or elevate their work in this space. Our really big go-to tool is our strategies placemats. And if you notice, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. We've looked at research in early childhood education, elementary education, secondary and collegiate education, and organized that research in a very teacher-friendly, next-day applicable space. And if you notice, we think about emotion and cognition as like good wine and cheese, right? Too often things are happening in silos. People are just looking at SEL, science of emotion and learning work, or they're looking at cognitive work or lifelong learning skills. I think we should argue about looking at the whole child's academic, social, and emotional development together. The one challenge we face is like, what are the questions researchers are asking, and how do they align with the questions teachers want asked and answered together? And we know there's other challenges for you as researchers and teachers. How do we get into schools? How do we not be disruptive in the flow of education? How do we do the research within a span that is quick enough to impact the education and the students that are in front of me this year? There are a lot of good challenges, but we're finding good models for doing the work. So as I wrap up, we also think of ways to measure the work. Some people call things like action research or evidence generation research. We do light things like at the beginning of the year, teachers trying to identify a need, challenge, or opportunity that they anticipate kids having, and thinking about the research-informed strategies that are out there that they might try, and revising this work based upon the students they have in a given year, and self-evaluating, did it work or not? And finally, we try to bring the work to educators at scale. We have a summer academy that's fully virtual because we want to reduce economic and geographic barriers to the ways we've organized the research many of you guys have contributed to. So some of our faculty you'll be familiar with from previous years. These are some of our heroes in the work. Maybe some of you guys can present at some point. We're also having a festival of education that's going to spotlight some research in the fall in October. And more importantly, I hope we can stay connected and maybe we can get some good Q&A going, Chris, because the alliance between researchers and everyday teachers is a very promising way to think about the future of education and leveraging research and strategies in the science of how the brain learns. So I know I spoke very fast. I hope something hit with you, and I can stop now and maybe we can do some Q&A.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, so we have a few questions that we're going to ask kind of on behalf of the group, but absolutely, participants, put your questions in the chat, please. And the first question that we'd love to hear from you is, what do you think the biggest, most impactful change you've seen arising from the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I started teaching in 1991 in Spokane, Washington. I went to Spokane because I thought it was going to be near Seattle. If you've ever been to Washington, Spokane and Seattle are nowhere near each other. I just want to let you guys know that. I would argue that that kid really who taught in 1991 thought of, I teach history, they learn it. And I actually would go so far as I would say, I thought their emotions, their social support and feeling of belonging, their identity, that was not my job. My job was to teach history. And if you asked me, speaking from the I perspective, the difference between Glenn in 1991 as a history teacher and Glenn in 2023, the answer is I know that emotion and cognition are not mutually exclusive. They are both. Thinking about the emotional state of a student, the social state of a student, the identity validation, micro affirmations, sets the conditions for the deep learning and the rich learning we want kids to do. So I would say, if you ask me, the biggest difference is I think of emotion and cognition as not silos, but needed in every single learning space, learning experience that exist in every school around the country. I often say I wish I could have a student recall, like a Volkswagen recall of the kids of my first 15 years, because I think I did us this service. I would love to fix some of my errors. Great question, though. Thank you.
Well, and we have a really interesting connection in the chat that therapy and stroke aphasia survivor, like therapy is, it says the exact foundation of lifelong learning and MBE principles, this idea of considering the whole person and supporting all elements. Excellent connection. Yeah, no, Thomas, I would love to connect more about aphasia. That's an area I need to know a little even more about. So thank you for throwing that in there. Okay, so an easy second little question, why is this so hard? What makes the translation from MBE research into practice so challenging? Well, you really had to ask that question, Chris. That's awesome. I think there's a lot of layers to it. One is early on in our work to find the researchers with the right mindset. And again, I assume this was an obvious mindset that they want their research to be used by everyday teachers in everyday schools was not a given. Right, a lot of researchers out there at universities they're working on tenure, they're working on different things for career trajectory. Fantastic, great, I don't doubt that. But we've run into some barriers like I don't know if I trust teachers with my research, or what if a teacher overstates or misrepresents? And we certainly know, like even Howard Gardner is going around the country saying, hey, teachers, like multiple intelligences is not learning styles. Right. So if he's doing it, we could be okay with that. So that's one. Number two, so that's my one thing, be open to teachers, get your stuff to teachers. And most of us teachers don't read some of the journals you publish in, which you need to publish in. I get it. So being involved in organizations like IMBIS that wants some outreach, presenting at conferences, maybe that you wouldn't think of normally presenting at, where actual everyday teachers are, like Learning Forward and ASCD. I would hope that would happen. Number two is we know, which is ironic, that foundational understanding of the science of teaching and learning is not part of teacher prep programs, education programs throughout the country, which seems a little ironic. Organ of learning is the brain. I would say the heart and the whole body as well. Shouldn't every teacher, before they enter the classroom, have the science of teaching and learning background? I'm not saying a master's in it, a major in it, or anything like that, just enough to be a little more, have better tools. So that's another one. And then obviously the way we design professional development in schools and professional learning is challenging. The one and done doesn't necessarily change teacher practices and behavior. We know what's good professional development. And we also have to make it usable. How do you translate your stuff into tools or frameworks like we have that teachers find non-threatening and applicable tomorrow? So I hope that's three things that jump to mind, Chris, but that's where I would think. Yeah, fantastic. And we have one more question from us, and then we're going to move on to questions from the group. But actually, we have a participant who hit on our next question by commenting on the tightness of requirements from school administration. And when you have standards and required minutes, those are some real limitations or the the confines with which some people need to work. So from your perspective, what do you think is needed to support teachers in implementing MBE research in their classrooms, understanding all these other requirements that they're working within? Yeah, I think Judy, you mentioned that in the chat. I think you're dead. I'm actually sitting right now in upstate Maryland in the Great Carroll County School District, and we just literally just talked about it next door before this call. There are a lot of demands and expectations for teachers. I would argue one is right. The science of teaching and learning is a pathway, I would argue, to meeting some of those requirements that school administrations, states, education organizations set. Like, we know feedback, high quality feedback, is really important to meet standards.
but we know from like studies out there, you know, that there's one study that my colleague Ian Keller always references, right? Where like 34% of the feedback that was given to the students actually reduced learning, right? So how can we create more efficient ways, better ways to get these research and strategies to teachers? Now, the answer is you gotta be willing to go slowly in this work. The idea that in 1 year you're going to transform a school or district and bring in a new initiative is really not realistic. I think Judy and others you guys would probably validate that. Connecting the science of teaching and learning to work that's already being done in the district with tools that honors, and here's the big thing, we have to honor the wisdom and the expertise of the teacher already, right? We have to think of these as tools and toolkits, not necessarily curriculums, right? These are not recipes, and you do the recipe and every kid's going to be successful, right? Not all research is going to work for every kid. Dylan Willem talks about this. Some research, but there's research that will do something for at least some kids, right? We know that. So those are things we have to consider. I would say, though, what we have done as a center is really brought play into professional learning. We brought flexibility. We brought multiple modality and multiple sensory instruction, because we know the adult brain learns as differently and as varied as the student brain. I think I made sense there. I don't know. I said a lot. There was a lot going on in my brain during that answer.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, now's the time to switch over to participant questions. So please put your questions in the chat. What would you like to know from the Glenn Whitman? He's done a lot of interesting work working with so many different schools. You know, I think sometimes think that some people might think that it's easier for some schools to implement these things than others. And I think you've really worked with such a range of schools to show that no matter where your starting point, there's something that MBE can offer to support.
Yeah, you look, our school has 110 teachers. We work with Frederick County Public Schools. They have 4,000 teachers, 35,000 students. So we have figured out the scale, leveraging technology at the right place, in-person experiences. I'll just say this, too many schools, and I know, Chris, we're gonna open up the questions. Too many schools do these themes every year. It's the year of the brain. And then next year, it's the year of project-based learning. And what's the research say about that? Or the next year, it's let's do diversity, equity, and belonging. You know, the brain ain't going anywhere. You know, the AI is here. We get it. VR is here. The world's not falling. We're going to be okay. But the brain is still the organ of learning, right? Our kids are going to have to think hard about the prompts they put in ChatGPT to get knowledge. So, you know, sustained and iterative is really an important strategy for districts to think about this work. So, sorry, Chris, any questions from the audience now? I will be quiet.
Yeah, we'll just keep an eye on the chat for any questions coming in. Oh my goodness, yes. The neuromyth of learning styles, absolutely. One of the most prominent neuromyths globally, and has been for at least the past 10 years, according to a lot of studies. And I will say that having taught or supported in an educational psychology class last semester, where we address that neuromyth so many times, and it stays, it's pervasive. Just saying that it's not true isn't enough to shift mindsets often. So Glenn, what do you have to say about that one? The neuromyth of learning styles.
Yeah, and look, I will be honest with everybody in the audience. I believed in learning styles before I started this work, right? It intuitively, it's sort of like it made sense to me, right? Don't I have a learning style? So I'll share something with the audience. Some of you know about these. So here's an example of, we saw research and we were like, we have to figure a way to bust this idea of neuromyths. So we built a card deck called Face the MBE Facts, right? And this is, again, look at how we took a research study that's been replicated. Paul Howard-Jones has done some great work in this in the UK and others, and tried to deliver it in a fresh way to educators. So we created this card game, and we have one for parents as well, right? And my lawyer would say, read the warning. So there's the warning. And let me just show you what we do with the card game, and we'll actually play one card. Like, if you think a statement about teaching and learning is true and the research backs it, you put in a happy face, false, you put it in the, looks like it had a tough night face. And if you really think the research is not conclusive, you put it in the middle. And, here's one card. So on one side, we have a statement about teaching and learning, right? And where would you put it? You're all researchers, you're educators. Where would you put this card? I'm not going to, just do a mental moment and play along. Don't overreact with what I'm about to do. So let's just say you sort it as true, right? And teachers and researchers and educators love pyramids. And I'm a little weary of pyramids. I just got to be honest with you. We know there's really, for each of the cards we created, there's enough research, promising research, to slant it one way or the other. So in the case of Bloom's, right, on the other side of the card, here is our response to the educator using the research study and the citation. Always have a citation here. So I'll let you read it if you want. But here's how we go after neuromyths like learning styles, or, you name it, about the science of reading. So I just want to give you an example of ways we take research that you guys do and make it teacher friendly and playful. Very unique approach. So I hope that helped, gave you a little model to that great question.
Yeah, fantastic. I see some people who say they have questions, but they haven't come through yet. So please put your questions in the chat. Let's see. And Sylvia, is there anything you want to know? Any burning questions you have?
Not directly, no. What is this? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so how people want to know, how can they get that deck, Glenn?
Okay, so it was funny. My dad was like a salesman. He sold beauty products, and I swore to myself I would never sell anything. But I will sell things that I think work and inspire teachers. So if you want the deck, again, and we have a teacher version, and we do have a parent version, because here's a link. You'll also see the link to the research base if you click on it. And if you want a lot of them, we'll reduce the price. Again, we're a nonprofit. We just got to keep the lights on a bit. But we want to do this at scale. We want to spread the work. And again, the teacher researcher, I just want to emphasize, for those of you who are doing research, we need you. We need you to write papers that teachers can read sometimes, so maybe soften some of the language, or write really good abstracts. That's the key. Give me a good abstract any day. And then if I need interpretation, I'll reach out to Chris Simmers, or I'll reach out to Sylvia or other friends in the field.
I guess I kind of do have a question when you said that you try to, I guess, identify what teachers or teachers will identify what the students are mostly struggling with, and then collaborate with researchers. Is that what you were saying?
So I think it works in a couple of ways. I think, what researchers want, what people in IMBIS who are really at the university level, maybe they're graduate students in a fellowship, or university professors, they want access to teachers in schools. We know that, right? Look, a lab in a very controlled environment, we know this, is not a classroom.
Yeah.
Right? You are localizing, right, for one variable, controlling for that one variable. And we know that does not exist in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
But it's promising enough if it's proven in the lab to see what it's done at scale with the student population. So in that, you want us, what we need help with sometimes is we have a question about maybe a strategy we're using instinctively that we think is working, but maybe we need some data, some ways to measure it. Now, you guys are thinking empirical measurement, right? Journal publication measurement. That'd be great, but we don't have the time or sometimes the resources. And teachers really want to know a little quicker than the way some researchers can work or allowed to work, because I want to impact the kids I have in front of me this year. Like 6-week trials where I can get results are my happy place, right? They really are, because then I know I can impact, in fact, maybe a little too, impact the students I have currently in my class. If I do a random control trial, which we write is, I guess is still the gold standard, but I don't know if it's always worth the money. And it takes years to find out the results, great. But I'm 3 or 4 classes down the road. And I know teachers take it very personally that we want to help the kids we currently have. The other thing is, you guys do research on areas. Now we should be doing more. We know, for example, formative assessment is still an underutilized strategy in most schools around the country. We don't formatively assess, low stakes, no stakes to work enough. And I think there's really compelling research of why we should do that. I think there's great research of the impact of technology on student achievement. I just read one study about like having a very controlled phone policy in a high school raised achievement levels by 6%. That's optimistic and reduce some anxiety and stress levels. So again, we have questions we would love your help on. Sometimes our end goal, though, is not always the same. I think the same end goal should always be to help kids. If we can agree on that, whether you're at the university, whether you're at the school, whether you're a consultant, then I think that's really a good starting place. I hope that sort of answered your question, Sylvia. Again, I get excited when you guys ask these questions.
Yeah, basically, sorry, before we move on to the next really quick, my question was just basically how do you, how is your interaction with the researchers? Is it to discuss the questions you have and then possibly come up with future projects, or like you said, kind of brainstorm how you can evaluate the question you have to just examine it on a smaller scale within your classroom independently? Or do you just, and then like you said, you look at the literature, of course?
Yeah. So again, I think there's enough ready-made research out there already. And please keep researching, keep doing it. I think sometimes we need help from researchers to interpret the research, right? It's not a skill not even me initially had, right? So forget even like, your own stuff. Like, how do you read a research paper and what maybe is promising is a skill that you could help us with. There's also an emerging job in schools like mine. The pathway for a lot of research is the university. But I would argue, and the UK does this great, there's this job called a research lead, right? So you're in a school. We have 3 of them in our school. You have dangerous research skills, right, that you could do now in a school setting. So, some of you I know want to be at the university level, maybe professors, great. There are new opportunities where you can work directly with teachers. The other way is obviously, like, we need to prove if a strategy is working or not. Some of the things we do are just not, they might be fun, they might be exciting, like putting emojis in slide decks is a waste of time. I think teachers need to understand I'm getting a clap from someone, Cindy. It creates extraneous cognitive load. It's useless. So I'll get off my horse. There's a great question in the chat, though, about open access to research. I think, Paul, you mentioned it. And I'll just say, take a look at our tiered research base, which is, we organize it in a very tiered way. And the learning scientists have great stuff. There's enough open stuff out there that I think that we can get you access to.
All right, thank you. We have 3 big questions, so get ready. Take a deep breath. The first one is excellent, and I'll jump in with one quick resource before you launch into it. But it says learning to read involves repurposing of neural networks in the brain. So what is your thinking around how can teachers be best supported in teaching reading effectively? And I'd like to, if I may, share a fantastic resource that's about to come out called Educational Neuroscience for Literacy Teachers. If you're interested in this space, there's another organization you might want to be a part of. It's the AERA Brain Neuroscience in Education SIG. Lucy Spence is in SIG, is Special Interest Group. So Lucy Spence is there. Ayan Mitra is actually a postdoc at the University of Connecticut. And this book is about to come out. I've got it pre-ordered. The reason I think it's promising is Lucy Spence, her background is education research. Ayan's background is neuroscience, and they're not just looking at neuroscience, they're also looking at the past 10 years of literacy instruction research and seeing how those two worlds can come together. And I think that's the best use of our space. I think not what can neuroscience tell teaching, but how can these two worlds work together to both develop each other. So Glenn, what do you think?
Well, I'll start with Judy's point. I don't want teachers to read academic journals. It's not a good use of their time. I'm just going to say that right now. What we need help on is organizing tools and frameworks that teachers can use, and that's what the center does. So, so that's one. We are at a really. I'm excited about where we are, and I get excited pretty easily, so don't get crazy. Where we are with the science of reading right now and literacy. I know there's tension. There is a lot of tension out there. And, you know, certainly the most listened to podcast in the country by educators right now is Sold the Story. And that's Emily Hanford's podcast on the science of reading. But I think this is a great example of where we're getting better at saying, here is what the research is pointing us and promising. Now, it's not going to work perfectly for every kid around phonics and other, you know, foundational skills. And we know it needs to be knowledge-rich experiences as well. But there is a science of reading that we should lean on and prioritize, I would argue. And I know there's tension. I get it. And I know people have dug in. But I think we've crossed sort of the Rubicon a bit in this work, is saying, no, I think more people are moving to saying, we're going to go this way. Now, the one thing I will say about that is, how do you get that research not only to teachers, but have them be willing to change habits if they've been using a program that's not been validated necessarily by the science of reading? That is the challenge. And that's the tension that researchers and schools and individual teachers have to sort of navigate together in a way that honors where teachers are. Honors how adult learns and the adult brain changes, right? My brain can change at 54, but the slope of that curve is a little steeper than students at the age of 5 to 7 to 10, you know, early childhood and puberty, when the dynamics of the brain is really impressive. I will say this, I do want to make a pitch for thinking about the science of reading beyond elementary, though. I would like to suggest that all teachers are science of reading teachers, right? If you ask a middle school teacher and an upper school English teacher, can they teach their kids how to read? Most of them can't, because that's not how they're trained. But every discipline at every level, college too, requires reading. So just something to think about, a little editorial comment there. But I hope that answered the science of reading question a bit.
All right, thank you so much. We do have some more excellent questions, but I want to acknowledge that this is our time. For people who are planning to spend 45 minutes, we fully understand if you need to go. We will share out these slides, which have Glenn's contact information, and also a lot of these resources that we mentioned. I hope, Glenn, if it's okay with you, thank you so much for your time. And if you're okay to stick around for a few more minutes, we still have a couple of excellent questions I'd love to hear your perspective on.
Absolutely. Look, I hope we can stay allies, reach out, whether we can connect formally or informally. I love the work of IMBIS, big fans. The more you guys can think about the everyday teacher, count me in.
All right. I really want to get these two questions from Paul in the chat. Have you already read those? Have you taken a look?
No, I've been trying not to multitask.
All right. I'll read them both out loud, and you can choose which one you address first. They're excellent. So we know that many schools, even in the West, are underfunded, and in many countries, the teacher training is not grounded well in the latest findings from science of learning. What key open resources would you suggest to use for teachers who want to educate themselves in MBE and apply in the classroom? That's the first question. So you did talk a little bit about what resources there. And what, in your opinion, are other simply implemented measures which could easily aid the understanding and use of MBE knowledge by teachers worldwide? I know you work with schools in a couple different areas in the globe. So anything there?
Yeah, I'll give 2 links in the chat. I gave this one earlier. I'm not saying our research base is the be all end all, but it is one way. And again, obviously people, most of it's open access links. Obviously people buy books, and I get money and funding a critical challenge, right? We also, though, and there are a number of organizations that do this, there's funding out there for access. And if you want to reach out to us, we have specific grant work for Title I schools and some schools that just don't have the resources. And I bet you others know, the learning scientists have great free stuff on their website. Deans for Impact, amazing free papers on their website. So again, a lot of the things I referenced, we could pass along. In terms of measurement, because again, I think we sometimes do a lousy job measuring professional growth and professional learning. I will suggest our diagnostic. Again, it takes 8 to 10 minutes. We do have a pre-diagnostic that you can do as an individual or as an individual school or district to give you some data. And we also have check-in diagnostics as well, and it's free. So this might be a way. And I will just say this, generally the results are pretty poor initially because most teachers in the world are not trained in this work. This doesn't mean they're not great teachers, right? Because it doesn't measure content expertise or all their pedagogical strategies or their EQ, right? Which we know is essential. But it does measure their efficacy, their belief in themselves as teachers and their ability to work with learning variability, their knowledge of MBE, and their translation confidence to the classroom. So give it a try. Love your feedback on it. I hope that answers those 2 questions.
Yeah, I think we've just got a few more comments in the chat. I won't give you any more big questions as we wrap it up, but thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's easy. It's fun.
And I would love to know, we have some names that I don't know in the chat. So if you didn't get a chance to tell us who you are, where you're joining from, and you would like to, please drop that information in the chat. It's important to us that we make this an inclusive space where we get as many diverse perspectives as possible. So we'd love to know how you found us, and also who you would love to see in the hot seat next, who you would like to see invited as an AMA guest. Let us know, and we would love to make that happen. So thank you all so much for your time. Yeah, well, no, not for you. You seem to enjoy it, right? But we would love to hear participant feedback on who you would love to speak to next. And thank you very much for our interpreters. I don't know how you do it. Phenomenal. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Oh, Christy wants to know, are you serious about welcoming visitors to the CTTL? Do you mean it?
Yeah. We'll just give you a little badge and you're a visitor, and yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Just email me. I threw my email in the chat a couple times. Follow me on Twitter. I tweet good things about this work. So yeah, come see us.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording and thank the ASL interpreters. They've been working so hard.